They said war would change us. They didn't say how. And they sure as hell didn't warn us about the smell. You don't forget the smell of a burning German city. It seeps into your gear, your skin, the back of your throat. Smoke and stone and something else, something living that had turned into something else. I was a private, just another dog face from a Pennsylvania steel town, barely 20. We were the first to step into Aachen, first real German city the Allies had to take. They told us this was history. All I could think about was how the bricks seemed to melt from the heat and how the sky turned a strange kind of orange when the shells hit. You think taking a city meant storming gates, raising flags, marching triumphant. Not Aachen. This place wasn't taken. It was clawed out inch by inch, like pulling teeth from a steel jaw that refused to break. The Wehrmacht fought like hell here. We were no longer chasing them. They were dug in. And we were the intruders now. We moved in through the outskirts, past farmhouses and half-empty barns that still smelled of livestock. Then, just like that, we were swallowed whole by narrow streets, tall stone buildings, and shadows that shifted with every artillery blast. The noise was constant, mortar cracks, the low whine of distant tanks, and the shrill, bone-deep chatter of MG-42s echoing like a devil's laugh across the alleys. The first time I saw one of ours fall, it was Johnson. Just dropped. No sound, no scream. Bullet through the eye, they said. He was smiling a moment before, talking about how he never had schnitzel. We left his body there. Had to. No time, and no way to reach him without getting ourselves killed. That's how fast it happened. I remember the faces more than the names. Faces lit by firelight, coated in grime, eyes too tired to blink. Sergeant Riles had this way of squinting, like he was always looking into the future and didn't like what he saw. He was tough, chain-smoked even when we were under fire, said it helped him think. The Germans expect fear, he used to mutter. So give him something else. It was sometime around the third day that the real nightmare started. House-to-house fighting. Each building was a fortress. Each window a potential death trap. We learned quickly, never enter through the front door. Too obvious. Go through basement, smash through walls, take the stairs two at a time if they were still there. And always, always listen. For breathing, for boots on tile, for the soft metal click of a grenade pin. We lost Carter in a bakery. Of all places. Place still had loaves in the display, covered in dust. He was clearing a back room when the ceiling just gave out, rigged with charges. His scream was the only thing louder than the explosion. We didn't find much after that, except his helmet bent and scorched. No one touched it. And yet, even there, in the thick of the killing, there were moments that didn't make sense. A piano, perfectly intact in a shattered parlor. A cat sunning itself on a rooftop while bullets flew beneath. A framed picture of a young German couple in love, still hanging on a cracked wall as if it was waiting for them to come home. Those little things messed with your head more than the gore ever could. The deeper we pushed into the city, the more twisted everything became. The resistance hardened. The Germans started using kids, Hitler Youth with dead eyes and two steady hands. One of them had set up in a church bell tower and took out two of ours before we figured out where he was. I remember the moment we dragged him down. He was maybe 15. He didn't cry, didn't speak, just stared like he was already halfway gone. That night it rained. Not a hard rain, just enough to turn rubble into sludge and soak into your boots. We found shelter in what was once a hotel, fancy by the looks of it. There were still gold-lettered menus scattered on the floor, and I remember one listed braised veal with plum sauce. Seemed like something from another planet. We huddled by the staircase, trying to sleep in shifts while the walls groaned from distant blasts. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, and for a second I thought I saw movement, shadows that didn't match our own. They say sleep deprivation plays tricks on you. Maybe it was just that, but something in that building felt wrong. Not haunted, exactly. Just off. Like the war had gotten into its bones. Like it remembered too much. In the morning, the floor above us collapsed. No one was hurt, we'd moved by then. But it left a perfect hole, like something had taken a bite out of the building. Through the dust and daylight, I could see the sky, streaked with the trails of our planes, and for a second it felt like the world was upside down. By the end of that week, I couldn't remember what quiet sounded like. My ears rang constantly, like a tuning fork in my skull. We lost Martinez, sniper, third floor, former schoolhouse. He had been humming all morning, some Sinatra tune. Then silence. Just like that. We didn't talk about the dead. We barely talked at all. Words became heavy, like everything else. You just moved, loaded your weapon, checked the corners, kicked open doors. Rinse and repeat. One evening, just before dusk, we got word that a German unit was holed up in the Rathaus, the old town hall. High ground, thick walls, good visibility. They weren't leaving without a fight. We approached under cover of smoke. Our boys had laid it thick, a curtain of gray that turned the whole street into something out of a nightmare. Shapes moved ahead of us, friendly, we hoped. The walls of the Rathaus loomed like a ghost ship, massive and silent. Windows black as ice. That's when the machine gun started. It tore through the smoke, biting chunks out of the stone near us, splinters flying like shrapnel. We scattered, hit the dirt. I crawled behind a toppled statue, couldn't tell who it was, some German noble or general, head missing. I could hear someone calling out, maybe Riles, but the sound was all mashed up with the gunfire. And then silence. Sudden, sharp, like the city itself held its breath. We knew it wasn't over. Just the pause before something worse. And that's when we heard it. A voice, low, steady, in English, from inside the Rathaus. It said, "Come in, Americans. We've been expecting you." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about territory. Aachen was a message. Test. And someone or something was watching how we'd answer. For a few long seconds after the voice echoed from within the Rathaus, no one moved. The smoke was beginning to lift just enough that we could make out the outlines of broken windows and the splintered archway that once framed the entrance, but the rest of the building remained cloaked in shadows thick with dust and dread. We didn't say anything. Not because we agreed to stay silent, but because no one had the words for what we just heard. There was something unnatural in that voice. Too calm, too steady, like it didn't belong in this world or any war-torn corner of it. It sounded rehearsed, like the person, or whatever it was, had been waiting all day, maybe all week, just to speak that one line, knowing it would land like a stone in our collective gut. Sergeant Riles was the first to snap back into motion. He gestured toward the left flank without looking, two fingers quick and sharp, and I followed, along with Davis and Corbin. We moved low, silent but fast, circling around a row of collapsed shops that had once sold clothes and clocks and radios, items now lost under rubble and ash, their glass displays shattered, contents scattered like forgotten relics. I try not to look at anything too long. Staring at remnants of normal life, especially things that hinted at beauty or comfort, had a way of pulling you out of your skin. Out here, that was dangerous. That was how you got killed. Better to stay in the moment, in the boots and mud and sweat, where your next move kept you alive. We made it to the north side of the Rathaus and took cover behind what remained of a fountain. The stonework was cracked through the middle, water long since stopped flowing. The sculpture of a lion head chipped and twisted so that it no longer looked noble, just tired. Riles motioned for us to wait, listening. The rest of the unit was repositioning behind us, setting up a perimeter. I could hear them, barely, moving through alleys and broken courtyards like ghosts with rifles. Then, once again, the voice. Louder this time, as if directed at us. "Come in or turn back. But you should know, the house decides." Corbin looked at me, then at Riles, who was frowning so hard his face seemed carved from stone. None of us had any idea what that meant. The house decides. Was it a bluff? Some kind of psychological warfare? We've been hearing rumors for weeks. German units using loudspeakers, broadcasting cries for surrender or fragments of intercepted American radio transmissions, trying to rattle our nerves. But this didn't feel like that. This felt personal. There was no time for debate. Riles raised his hand, rotated his wrist once, a silent order to breach. We entered the building from the side through a door half torn from its hinges. The air inside was cold and heavy, thick with the smell of wet stone, scorched wood, and something metallic I didn't like. My boots made soft squelching sounds with every step, a reminder that the floor was slick with mud or worse. Our flashlights cut narrow tunnels of light through the gloom, revealing shattered furniture, a grand staircase blackened by fire, and the remains of paintings that had once hung along the walls, portraits of men in formal uniforms, now mostly burned away, their faces smudged into vague shadows. The quiet inside was worse than the battle outside. It felt too complete. The kind of silence that presses against your ears, makes you doubt your own heartbeat. Davis muttered something under his breath, probably a prayer, and I felt the urge to do the same, though I didn't. The building had a strange presence, like it was listening. We made our way toward the central chamber, careful with every step. There were signs that someone or several people had been here recently. Footprints in the dust, scattered shell casings, a cigarette still smoldering in a ceramic ashtray, the kind with little gold eagles on the side. But no bodies, no sound, nothing to explain the voice. And then we found a radio. It sat on a table in the center of what used to be a council room, surrounded by broken chairs and torn papers. It was a standard-issue German military set, humming faintly. Its speaker crackled for a moment, and then the voice returned. Only now it was different. Not just calm, familiar. Private James Walker, it said. My name. My full name. I felt something inside me twist, something primal and sick and impossible to ignore. No one outside of our unit knew I was here. Not my name, not my location, not what we were doing. I saw the others turn to me, eyes wide but lips shut. They didn't ask how it knew. They couldn't. The voice continued, slower now. You saw the boy in the tower. You remember his eyes. Yes, I remembered. I didn't want to, but I did. And somehow, God helped me, and knew that. I took a step forward, reached out, and switched off the radio. Just like that, the room went dead again. No static, no voice, only our breathing. I expected something to happen, some kind of response, retaliation, maybe even an ambush. But nothing did. We searched the rest of the building room by room. We found more signs of recent activity. Maps on the walls, empty crates that once held ammunition, dried blood, but no living soul. Whoever had been here was long gone, or hiding in a place we couldn't reach. Or maybe they'd never been here at all. When we regrouped outside, the sky was dimming. The city beyond the Rathaus still smoldered, buildings bleeding smoke like wounded animals. Reinforcements were arriving, but slowly. Aachen wasn't falling easily, and yet something had shifted. We all felt it. That voice had done something to us, not just scared us, but opened a door we hadn't known existed. One that couldn't be closed now. Back at temporary camp near the cathedral ruins, I tried to sleep. I lay on a bedroll on the cold stone floor of what had once been a museum, surrounded by cracked sculptures and ash-covered relics. The others were scattered nearby, some writing letters, some cleaning weapons they'd already cleaned a dozen times. I stared at the ceiling and thought of home, of my mother's kitchen, and the way the screen door creaked in summer. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't push away the memory of that voice, or the way it said my name like it had always known me. Later that night, I woke suddenly. No dream, no sound, just a feeling sharp and immediate, like a jolt of cold water through the spine. I sat up, looked around. Nothing. Everyone's still asleep. The fire burned low. But there, in the center of the room, placed neatly on a pedestal where a statue's head had once rested, was the helmet we'd lost in the bakery. Carter's helmet. Burned and bent, but here, it wasn't possible. And yet, there it was. There was a moment, just one, a breath really, where I questioned everything I saw. My eyes locked on Carter's helmet, and the weight of it nearly drove me back to the floor. Not because of the memory of how he died, though that was enough, but because of the impossibility of it being there, in that exact spot, untouched by any of us. We had left it behind, deep in the ruins of a bakery several blocks away, beneath beams and blood and the fire that had swallowed everything. None of us had returned for it. We couldn't. And yet now here it stood, resting atop a marble pedestal as if placed there by some unseen hand, almost reverently, like an offering or a warning. And in that dim glow of the fading firelight, its scorched metal seemed darker than night, the edges curled and warped like a wound that refused to heal. I didn't say anything at first, just rose slowly to my feet, not even brushing the dust from my coat, eyes fixed on the thing like it might vanish the moment I blinked. The others stirred but didn't notice, still caught in uneasy sleep, curled beneath coats and bedrolls, their faces slack with exhaustion, worry etched deep even in unconsciousness. I moved closer, careful not to step on the scattered bits of plaster and burned paper that littered the floor. My boots crunched softly, and the sound made my skin crawl. That helmet didn't belong here. Nothing about this made sense. There was no wind, no animals, no sounds of war in the distance, just silence, so absolute it pressed against my eardrums like pressure at the bottom of a deep ocean trench. I reached out. My hand hovered over the steel, fingers trembling, not from cold, but something older, more primal. I didn't want to touch it. Every instinct screamed to walk away. But something else, something beneath that fear, urged me forward, as though I owed it to Carter, or to the city, or to something even less familiar. When my fingers finally made contact, the metal was ice cold. Not just cold like forgotten steel, but unnaturally so, like it had been buried beneath snow or stone for months, untouched by heat or time. And in that instant, a sound low, like a hum, slipped through the air, so faint I thought I imagined it, a vibration that ran through my fingertips into my bones. Behind me, Davis stirred awake with a gasp, eyes wide as if he'd been drowning in his dreams. He sat up sharply, blinking at me, then followed my gaze to the helmet. I saw his breath catch in his throat. He didn't ask how it got there. He didn't have to. Some things don't need to be spoken aloud, not when you both know the rules of the world have shifted. By dawn, the helmet was gone. No one had touched it again. I hadn't moved. Davis hadn't slept. But when the first light of the sun pierced through the cracked museum roof, warming the stone floor in slanted gold rays, the pedestal was empty, its surface smeared with a black residue like soot or ash. We didn't mention it during breakfast, if you could call 2 mouthfuls of cold rations breakfast. We just kept moving, silent, eyes low, minds racing. Maybe it was a trick. Maybe someone had found it and placed it there as a sick joke. But no one in our unit had returned to that bakery, and none of them would have risked walking through open streets in the dark. Not with the snipers. Later that day, orders came down. We were to push toward the city's southern quarter. Intelligence said a unit of German engineers had fortified several old buildings near the Opera House, and command wanted them cleared before tanks could safely roll through. It sounded routine. Another street, another block, another set of ruined walls to climb over, clear, and forget. But nothing felt routine anymore. Not since the voice in the Rathaus. Not since Carter's helmet had reappeared like some kind of cursed relic dredged up from the earth itself. We advanced in staggered formation, weaving through alleys choked with debris. The fog was thicker that morning, clinging to the ground like it had been summoned for the sole purpose of hiding what lay ahead. The city felt stranger with each passing day. We've been here a week now, maybe more. Time lost shape under fire and fear. Every corner looked familiar, and yet nothing ever seemed quite the same. Windows changed. Buildings leaned differently. Streets narrowed where they hadn't before. Riles joked it was just shell shock, or maybe the Germans had figured out how to move the damn architecture around. But even he said it with less certainty than usual. As we approached the Opera House, the mood darkened. Not just from the clouds overhead or the distant thunder of artillery, but from the building itself. It was still standing, mostly intact, its great arched facade cracked but proud, a strange monument to a past that refused to die. Statues of muses and composers lined the roof, though many had been decapitated or shattered. One figure, Beethoven, I think, had half his face missing, and the way the remaining stones stared down at us made my skin prickle. It looked angry. Not terrified. Not mournful. Angry. Inside, the Opera House was worse than I expected. The lobby was untouched, like the war had skipped over it out of some strange reverence. Marble floors, red velvet drapes now dulled with dust, massive chandeliers still hanging above, though one leaned precariously, held by a single rusted chain. But the silence, it wasn't empty. It felt full, like the building was holding its breath, waiting for something. We fanned out. I took point on the left, heading toward a hallway lined with portraits of long-dead performers. Their eyes followed me. At least that's how it felt. Each step echoed too loudly, and I realized there was no sound of birds or wind or even distant gunfire. The Opera House was completely cut off from the war around it, like a pocket of forgotten time. In the main theater, we found them. 5 German soldiers, all dead. No blood, no wounds, just slumped in their seats like they'd come to watch a performance and never left. Their faces were pale, eyes closed, mouths relaxed. They looked asleep, peaceful even. Which was wrong. This war didn't grant peaceful deaths. Something about the scene was too perfect. Their rifles were laid neatly at their feet, boots lined up. One of them still held a small notebook, open to a page filled with strange marks, symbols I didn't recognize. I reached for it, but Riles stopped me with a hand on my arm. "Leave it," he said, voice low and flat. So we did. But as we turned to leave, something strange happened. The stage lights flickered on. No power had been restored to this part of the city. We'd passed the substations, they were all blown to hell. And yet every chandelier, every spotlight, every lamp on that grand old stage blazed to life, bathing the velvet curtain in gold. We stood frozen, weapons half raised, staring at the sudden brightness like men watching the sun rise on another planet. And then the music started. Soft, distant, a piano slow and deliberate, echoing through the space like a memory. The melody was simple, haunting. I didn't recognize the tune, but something about it felt familiar. Like I'd heard it once in a dream, or a story told to me when I was very young and half asleep. It made my chest tighten, made my hands tremble. And though no one said it aloud, we all felt it. This wasn't just strange. This was wrong. The curtain began to rise. And behind it, in the growing light, a shadow stepped forward. The figure behind the curtain did not emerge all at once. First, just a hint of movement, slow and deliberate, like the shifting of a stage prop or the beginning of an illusion. The kind of motion that triggers something deep in the human mind, something primal that knows when what you're seeing isn't quite right. Then came the legs, boots black and polished, too pristine for this city. And then the torso, clad in what looked like a faded Wehrmacht officer's coat, long and stiff, with a collar turned high and adorned with insignia dulled by time or smoke. But the face, what little we could see of it, was cast in shadows that refused to lift, as though the lights themselves had decided not to illuminate whatever it was that stood center stage in a house of death and echoes. It wasn't just eerie, it was wrong in the kind of way that makes grown men forget they're holding rifles, forget they're trained to face bullets and fire and horror head-on. This felt like something else entirely, something older than uniforms and flags, something that didn't belong on any battlefield. No one fired. No one moved. Even Riles, who would face down tanks with a grin, just stood there with his jaw clenched and his weapon slowly lowering. The figure remained still, and the heavy silence, the piano continued, playing that same looping melody, 12 notes that rose and fell like a lullaby for the dead. I realized, with a slow, creeping certainty, that it wasn't coming from any instrument we could see. There was no pianist on stage, no orchestra pit. The music came from everywhere and nowhere, filling the opera house like mist, thick and lingering and clinging to the edges of thought. I wanted to speak, to whisper something, maybe to break the spell, maybe just to hear my own voice, but my throat was dry, my tongue heavy. And before I could try, the lights went out again, all at once, leaving only the echo of those last few notes hanging in the dark like ash in the air. When the lights returned, just a flicker, a cough of electricity, there was nothing on stage. No figure, no movement, no sound. The curtain hung heavy and still, the seats empty except for the 5 silent bodies of the dead German soldiers. Whatever had stood before us was gone, leaving behind only a strange warmth in the air and a growing certainty among us that we had seen something that defied not just the logic of war, but the rules of time and place itself. Riles was the first to break the silence, his voice sharp but quieter than usual. "We're leaving," he said, and no one argued. We didn't check the balcony, didn't sweep the dressing rooms. We walked out of that theater like men walking away from a grave we hadn't meant to find. Back on the street, the fog had lifted, but the city looked different again. The sun was higher than we expected. We'd been inside the opera house for maybe 15 minutes, 20 at most, but our watches said nearly 3 hours had passed. The recon team waiting near the church ruins said they tried to raise us on the radio multiple times and heard only static. The same kind of static that had come from the radio in the Rathaus, low and humming like a voice buried too deep to speak. None of us had an explanation, and none of us wanted to give one. That night, we didn't sleep in the museum. We found a bombed-out bank with thick walls and a vault door that's still closed, and we hunkered down there like rats hiding from something too large to fight. No fires, no lights. We ate cold and whispered when we spoke at all. Davis kept fingering the rosary he wore under his collar, mouthing prayers he hadn't said since basic training. Corbin stared at the far wall like he expected it to move, and I sat against the steel door, writing in a small notebook I'd kept since landing in France. It had been filled with sketches and little maps, notes about people we lost, things we saw. But now it held only one line written over and over again. The house decides. I didn't remember writing it. The next morning, before the sun had risen, we received new orders. The Germans were falling back across the city, but they were leaving behind mines, traps, and small squads meant to slow our advance. We were to clear a corridor through the university district, where some of the fiercest fighting had taken place in the last 48 hours. The buildings there were different from the ones we'd seen before. More stone, older, filled with narrow corridors and courtyards where snipers could nest for days without ever being seen. We moved with caution, clearing room by room, calling out positions, watching rooftops for movement. The enemy didn't hit us directly, not at first. Instead, they used the city itself, collapsed staircases, flooded basements, walls rigged with charges set to blow at the slightest shift in air pressure. It was as if the city had been weaponized, not just defended. By mid-afternoon, we'd lost 2 men, Graves and Sully. No screams, no last words. Just gone. One to a hidden mine in a courtyard that had looked like a garden once. The other swallowed by a collapsing floor, falling into smoke and flame and silence. We couldn't recover their bodies. Not safely. And so we marked their locations on a map, whispered their names, and kept going. Because we had to. Then came the old library. It was tucked between 2 crumbling dormitories, its facade nearly untouched despite the damage all around. The windows were blown out, but the main door stood, a massive oak slab held by hinges so old they might as well have been part of the original stone. Riles hesitated before ordering us in. "Quick sweep," he said. "Look for intel, munitions, maybe wounded." No more than 10 minutes. We entered single file. Inside, the library was dust and silence. Rows upon rows of shelves, most of them collapsed, their contents spilled across the floor like broken language. The air smelled of mold and paper, an oddly comforting scent amid the stink of smoke and blood. There was something sacred about the space, like even the war had hesitated to destroy it completely. I moved with Corbin through the northern wing, stepping over torn pages, shattered glass, fragments of forgotten stories. That's when we found the desk. It was placed in the center of the room, perfectly aligned, untouched by debris. A single book lay open atop it. The pages were blank, except for one, and on that page, scrawled in a shaky hand, were the words, "You are not the first." No signature. No date. Just that phrase staring up at us like a dare or a warning. Corbin touched the page and screamed. Not a wounded scream. Not a physical one. It was the kind of scream that comes from somewhere deeper, a sound that tears through the soul and leaves it bleeding in ways no medic can treat. He dropped to his knees, shaking, hands clutching his face like he was trying to hold himself together. I pulled him back, dragged him out of the room. The rest of the squad joined us in seconds. And once again, we did not speak of what we'd seen. We were breaking. One by one, in different ways, we were unraveling. And Aachen, this city of stone and silence and secrets, wasn't done with us yet. The city seemed to breathe now, not like a place filled with people and movement, but like something immense and dormant stirring just beneath its stone skin. We didn't talk about what had happened in the library, not out loud anyway, but the weight of that place lingered in the way we moved, the way we looked at each other when we thought no one was paying attention. There was a heaviness to the air, thicker than just smoke and winter damp, something we couldn't name but all felt. Corbin hadn't said a word since that scream. His eyes had that distant glaze, like he was trying to look past everything, even his own body. Riles gave him space, but his glances toward him became more frequent, tighter, like he was measuring how much longer Corbin could hold. Orders came the next morning, this time with a sense of urgency that carried an edge. We were to move to the northernmost edge of the city. There was a villa, partially intact, perched on the ruins of what had once been one of Aachen's wealthier districts. Intelligence suggested it had been used recently as a command post, then abandoned in a hurry, leaving behind maps, documents, perhaps even high-ranking officers unaware of how quickly the front had shifted. We were to move in quietly, gather everything of value, and hold until reinforcements arrived. Riles didn't like it. Neither did I. But questioning orders wasn't our job, and after the theater, the bank, and the library, part of me felt like this was all heading somewhere. The villa wasn't just another waypoint. It was a culmination, even if we didn't know of what. The approach was slow. The streets around the villa were unusually quiet. No distant gunfire, no rubble being shifted, no occasional crack of a sniper shot breaking the stillness. It was silence in its purest form, the kind that presses in on your ears and makes your own breathing sound unnatural. The building itself stood like a relic of another time, its stone facade stained with smoke, but the windows mostly intact, the gate still hanging loosely from its hinges. Ivy crept up one side as if trying to pull the structure down into the earth. There was something about it that reminded me of a photograph I'd seen once in a pre-war magazine, something regal poised, made for gatherings and grand speeches, now reduced to a hushed mausoleum holding on to the last gasp of dignity. Inside, the villa smelled of wax and old wood, like someone had been trying to maintain the illusion of normalcy until the very last moment. The floors were clean, eerily so. No signs of struggle, no splattered blood or overturned furniture. There were documents, yes, maps pinned to walls, radio logs, dossiers scattered across a dining room table still set with polished silverware and a candelabra. The wax melted into grotesque shapes like something out of a dream. We moved through the rooms with our rifles up, every shadow a possible threat. And yet, there was nothing. No soldiers. No booby traps. Not even the echo of footsteps besides our own. Then Davis found the cellar door. It was hidden behind a bookshelf on sliding rails, the kind you see in mystery novels. He only noticed it because of the draft cool air seeping through the gap between shelf and wall, carrying with it the scent of damp stone and something else, something metallic and old, like rusted iron or blood on pennies. Riles hesitated just a moment before ordering the breach. It was too perfect, too classic. A secret door in a Nazi command post wasn't just suspicious, it was theatrical. But still we descended. The stairs were narrow and curved, lit by a line of electric bulbs that flickered as if uncertain whether to stay on. Each step echoed strangely, not like a basement, but like a hall that didn't end where it should. The cellar opened into a series of rooms, some looked like storage, others like studies or holding areas. One chamber had dozens of old books, handwritten notes, and a mix of German, Latin, and symbols I didn't recognize. Another held radio equipment that didn't match the era, wires strung in intricate webs, dials etched with markings instead of numbers. But the final room, the one furthest from the stairs, was different. It was round, stone-walled, with a high ceiling that vanished into shadow. In the center stood a table, and on the table lay a single item, a map of Aachen, old and yellowed, with circles drawn in red ink around 5 locations, each one we had visited. Riles stepped forward slowly, studying the circles, lips moving silently as if trying to piece together a riddle. I watched his face, the way his brow furrowed deeper with each second. Then he looked up at me, and for the first time since landing in Europe, he looked afraid. Not panicked, not startled, afraid. Something is following a pattern, he said, his voice low. This isn't just us clearing the city. We're being led, steered. And in that moment, it all clicked in my head, not with clarity, but with force. The opera house, the library, the cellar, they were checkpoints. Not military ones. Something else. Each place had tried to show us something, to tell a story we weren't meant to understand yet. Each had left behind signs, sounds, visions, anomalies that defied logic. And now we were here, at the center of whatever it was. Then we heard it. A sound deep below the floor. Not mechanical. Not human. A low resonance, like a choir humming in the belly of the earth. It wasn't loud, but it made the floor vibrate, made the stone feel softer, as if the building was being gently stirred. Riles backed away from the map. Davis raised his weapon. Corbin just stared at the wall, still silent. I felt the pressure behind my eyes, like something was trying to push its way in. Not a memory, not a thought, but a presence. Something watching, waiting, judging. Then the map burst into flame. No spark, no warning. Just sudden fire, rising from the center and consuming the paper without touching anything else. We jumped back, but the flame didn't spread. It danced in place, a column of flickering orange, before collapsing in on itself and vanishing. Where the map had been, the table was unburned, untouched. But in the wood, scorched into the grain, was a single word, whiter, further. We left the cellar in silence. Outside, dusk had begun to settle over the ruined rooftops of Aachen, casting long shadows that bent and curled in unnatural ways. Reinforcements arrived not long after, a fresh unit from the south, bright-eyed and unaware. Riles handed off the report and simply said the villa had been cleared. No mention of fire or maps or humming beneath the floor. We moved out before the sun vanished entirely, heading west toward the final quadrant still under Axis control. Our radios crackled now and then, voices we didn't recognize whispering broken syllables, fragments of languages. I turned mine off. In the final days of the battle, things moved quickly. German resistance hardened, then collapsed like brittle bone. The last push took us through the industrial district, across bridges blown halfway to rubble, through corridors lined with burning oil and the stench of chemicals. We fought hard, but it was different now, mechanical, distant. We weren't thinking about orders or victory anymore. We were thinking about the pattern, about the way we had been led through a city that didn't want to be understood, only endured. And when it ended, when the ceasefire came and we stood among the smoke and the snow and the corpses, we didn't cheer. We looked back toward the center of Aachen, toward the villa, the theater, the library. And we knew the war wasn't over, not really. Not for us. Somewhere beneath the city, beneath the ruins and bones, something had watched us pass through its labyrinth. And I don't think it blinked. Not once.